No one had stepped forward for the last Apache woman until Nayati Firewolf paid the price to bring her home. Before we begin, hit that like button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The wind dragged brittle leaves across the dry, cracked road. Ash Ridge didn't boast many trees, and those few cottonwoods lining the South Trail were already stripped bare by an early cold snap. Dust coated the town's wood buildings. Most windows were shut tight. A few were boarded. Some doors creaked on their hinges as the wind passed through. The sun hung low, a deep gold, casting long fingers of shadow across the street. Nayati Firewolf rode in from the west, his horse worn and quiet under him. He wasn't there for company. Just needed horseshoes, lamp oil, maybe some flour. Should have been a quick trip grab supplies, ride home. He still had fence work to finish before the frost set in. But Nayati didn't dismount right away. The forge was burning blacksmith Nodin iron hand, hammering in rhythm. Two local men leaned on the rail nearby, arms folded, eyes on the sparks. They didn't look up as he passed. Everyone knew him. The man who lived alone past the timber line. The widower who hadn't spoken much since Nita Willow died 3 winters back. The one who rode into town only when he couldn't avoid it. As Nayati guided his horse past the livery and toward the general store, he saw her. She wasn't inside the corral. No, she stood just behind the gate, behind the fence, like cattle. A rope stretched across the wood rails to keep her penned. Her arms hung at her sides. Her wrists were swollen and raw, old iron marks scabbed and split. One shackle still clung to her left wrist, a short chain dragging the dirt. Her ankles were bare. No shoes. Her hair hung long and black, tangled in the breeze. She didn't flinch, though the cold wind bit sharp. She didn't crouch, didn't plead. She stood tall, shoulders back, chin raised, just enough to say she still had pride. Nayati stopped walking. Her dress had once been beautiful deerskin fringed, beaded like the dresses worn by Apache women proud of who they were. Now it was torn, slashed at the chest and side, exposing the deep line of her cleavage. The neckline sagged, worn down and frayed. She was breathing evenly. Eyes steady. He looked once, then looked away. She wasn't tied to anything, just fenced in. Like no one expected her to try and flee. 2 men, Hakan Bearclaw and Matto Greyfox, stood nearby with arms crossed. One spat. The other kicked dust. Neither looked at her. Not really. Nayati took a few steps forward, stopping short of the gate. The woman didn't move, her eyes locked with his. No fear. No welcome. Just stillness. She was young, early 20s maybe. Her face was thin but strong. High cheekbones, dried blood crusting her bottom lip. Her body, though the dress hung in pieces, was powerful. Muscle in her legs, curve in her hips, strength in her shoulders. Her feet were dirty. In her hand, she gripped a smooth gray stone. Behind Nayati, the hammer struck once more, then silence. He turned to Matto Greyfox. Why is she still here? Matto shrugged. Apache. Army took most of them. This one got left behind. She won't talk, won't say who she belonged to. Nobody came for her. What happens if no one does? Sheriff Talon Bearstrike said she'd be sent east. Or worse. Matto shifted. Don't really matter to folks. She ain't from around here. Nayati asked again. Then why she's still in that pen cost money to send her off. Government won't pay. Sheriff won't either. Someone's got to want her bad enough. Nayati looked back at her. She hadn't moved. Still held that same stance, same eyes. Wind caught her hair, but her body stayed carved from stone. He glanced at her bruised face, the cuff, the dirt along her collarbone. How much, he asked. Matto blinked. What? For her release. You serious? Nayati reached into his saddle pouch, pulled out a worn leather sack and held it out. It clinked with silver. Matto hesitated. She's not mine to sell. You said someone has to want her. I'm here. Matto looked at Hakan Bearclaw, then at the gate. Finally, he took the coin. No refunds. Nayati gave a single nod, then stepped forward. The latch creaked as the gate opened. The chain on her wrist gave a soft rattle. She still didn't flinch. He walked closer. That's when the smell hit smoke. Sweat days without water. Her skin was sunburnt and cracked at the neck. Her eyes didn't move. I'm not going to touch you, Nayati said quietly. You walk on your own. She didn't speak, but she stepped forward. One bare foot, then the other. She moved just enough, not exposing more than what already had been stolen by time and rough hands. Her grip stayed tight around the stone. Nayati turned, walked back toward the wagon. He didn't look to see if she followed, but she did. She climbed in without help. The wagon groaned beneath her weight. Nayati took the reins, gave the horse a nudge. No one said goodbye. After she'd finished eating, Aiyana Skyfeather lay down near the fire, her back to the flames. Nayati Firewolf sat in silence, watching the embers glow low. His mind drifted back to the winter Nita Willow died. The fever had come quick, cruel. They'd buried her before the frost locked the earth. He hadn't spoken much about it since. Truth was, he hadn't wanted to. The homestead stayed the same, still standing, still breathing, but always quiet. Now there was someone else. She hadn't said a word since stepping into his wagon, but she hadn't run either. That meant something. That night she slept with her boots off. One hand curled tight around that smooth stone, the other tucked beneath her cheek. Nayati didn't sleep much. The fire cracked from time to time, breaking the stillness. Her breath never changed, steady and deep. By sunrise, they were on the move again. Neither of them looked back toward Ash Ridge. The road narrowed as they reached the edge of Nayati's land. A weathered fence post nearly hidden by tall grass and scrub marked the boundary. His property stretched wide and empty low hills off to the east, crooked pines at the far back. No fences in the front. Just space. Silence. That's how Nayati liked it. They didn't speak for the last hour of the ride. As they crested the ridge, the house came into view, a squat wood-sided structure, stone chimney tin roof rusted to a dull red. The barn sat off to the side, faded and bent, one loft panel missing. 2 sheds out back, one for wood, one for tools. It all looked the same, just like it had since Nita passed. He circled the wagon around the back. The wheels creaked beneath the weight. He tied off the horse, climbed down slow, then turned to help her. She didn't take his hand. She stepped out barefoot, her feet hitting dirt. Cuts now marked her ankles from the wagon's rough planks. The hem of her dress dragged in the dust. The tear at her chest had opened just enough to show the soft arc of her breast. She didn't fix it, didn't flinch, just stood there gripping her stone. Nayati opened the back door. "This way," he said. The scent of dry wood and long dormant ash clung to the house. The stove hadn't been used in days. He set his pack on the table, then put a tin pot on the stovetop. Aiyana stood just inside the doorway, her body tense, scanning the room ceiling, hooks, windows. Her hand never let go of the stone. She didn't say a word. "I'll get the fire going," Nayati said. "You can sit if you want." He didn't expect her to, but after a pause, she stepped in quiet and lowered herself onto a small wooden stool near the corner, her knees pressed together, arms folded. She didn't let her back touch the wall. Nayati lit the stove and waited for the flames to catch. Then he pulled out 2 bowls and filled them from the reheated pot beans, smoked meat, a few onions from the garden. He placed 1 bowl in front of her, the other across from it. She didn't move. He sat first. Didn't touch his spoon, just watched the steam curl off the stew. His leg throbbed from the long ride. He shifted his foot beneath the table and looked at her again. She was staring at the food now. Still, she hadn't touched it. "You hungry?" he asked. She finally looked at him. "Salt," she said. Just that one word. Nayati fetched the tin shaker from the counter and set it beside her. She took it, gave 1 quick shake, and began to eat small, careful bites. He watched her eat for a few seconds, then looked away and started on his own. It was the first meal he'd shared with someone across that table in 3 years. They ate in silence. When she laid her spoon down, he gathered the dishes and washed them. She didn't move, just watched the motion of his hands in the water. "Bathroom's out back," he said. "Pump's cold. Water's clean." She rose slowly. Her knees cracked. She glanced at the door, not toward the road, just checking. He saw that. Always checking the exit. He didn't stop her when she stepped out. She returned 5 minutes later, strands of damp hair stuck to her cheeks, sleeves wet. She looked colder now, but cleaner. The dirt had been washed from her arms. Her face was bare. He handed her a towel without a word. She dried off slowly, gaze lowered. Nayati picked up a folded quilt from the back of a chair and laid it out on the bed. "You sleep here. I'll take the chair." She didn't argue. She lay down stiffly still in that same torn dress. The blanket only reached her knees. When she rolled, the neckline slipped again, revealing more than she likely realized. But she didn't fix it. She turned her face to the wall. Nayati stayed in the chair near the stove. Boots on, arms folded. Sleep didn't come fast. He kept thinking about her voice when she asked for salt. Not the word, but the way she'd said it. Calm, certain. He'd expected something else. Fear, panic, anger even. But she was just quiet. Like him. He hadn't meant to bring anyone home. That wasn't the plan. But when he'd seen her in that pen, barefoot, half-dressed, unclaimed, it stuck wrong in his gut. Not pity. Not guilt. Something about the way she looked at people, like she already knew what they'd do and had stopped caring. He couldn't leave her there. Not like that. Not behind that fence. Not in front of men like Hakon Bearclaw and Matto Greyfox. He'd done things in his youth he wasn't proud of. Rode with hard men. Took part in darker things. Earned some scars. Left others. But all of that had gone into the ground with Nita. Now there was this woman who hadn't begged, hadn't cried, just stood still. And he'd paid silver to bring her home. The fire flickered low in the stove as the night stretched on. Around midnight, she stirred. Not fully awake, not resting either. Her hands clutched the quilt. Her legs kicked once. She mumbled something soft and foreign. He didn't move, just listened. She rolled over and slowly settled. Her breath evened out. Nayati shifted, pulling his coat over his lap. Outside, wind scraped along the windows. The silence wasn't so sharp anymore. He thought of Nita's laugh. the way she used to hum while working in the field, the mud on her hands in spring. That sound had left the house the day she died. But now, with Aiyana Skyfeather asleep across the room, the quiet didn't feel so empty anymore. Not kin, not a friend, not yet. But she was still breathing. Nayati Firewolf leaned back against the log wall, his eyes nearly shut. Across the room, the woman shifted again, pulling the quilt tighter across her chest. That stone she always clung to finally loosened in her hand. He didn't even know her name, but she hadn't left. That counted for something. The sun hadn't crested the ridgeline when Nayati stepped outside to check the sky. Pale clouds drifted slowly over the peaks, thin ones, the kind that promised cold, that lingered all day. The wind had calmed, and the frozen ground held firm under his boots without a trace. It was a good day to patch the chicken coop before snow rolled in again. A day made for getting things done. Inside the cabin was quiet as breath. When he glanced back, she was awake. Not speaking. Not sitting up. Just watching from under the fold of the quilt. Her eyes trailed his movements. No fear in them, just steady watchfulness. Her fingers had curled back around that stone. He'd noticed she never slept on her back, never without that small gray rock in hand like it held her world together. He never asked why. "You hungry?" he asked. She didn't answer, just pushed herself upright, wincing as her hand found her ribs. Her dress slipped again off one shoulder, and just for a second he saw the soft curve of her breast, the line disappearing into torn cloth. He turned away, moved toward the stove without a word. She didn't fix the dress. She stood stretching slow, one hand pressing her side, like something inside still pulled wrong. She crossed the room and took a seat at the table without waiting to be asked. He brought bread beans, a tin cup of cold well water. She ate slowly. Not like she was scared. Just careful. As if she needed to test each bite before trusting the next. After the meal, she followed him outside in silence. The cold bit harder beyond the door. Nayati shrugged on his coat. She had no coat. Only the torn dress and that worn shawl from the wagon drawn tight across her shoulders. The hem had frayed more, exposing her calves. Her feet were wrapped in rough cloth strips he'd given her the day before. Not quite shoes, but better than bare skin. She never complained. They walked to the coop behind the barn. Chickens scattered at their approach wings, fluttering softly against the cold. Their prints marked the hard earth, like fleeting shadows. Nayati crouched beside the broken slat. "Hold this," he said, pointing at a warped board. She knelt beside him without hesitation, fingers wrapping the wood firm. Her hands were split and raw at the knuckles. She didn't flinch. He worked next to her in silence, hammering nails, mending joints, doing the kind of work that didn't need words. An hour passed that way. Then she rose quickly, clutching her side, making him straighten. "You're hurt." She didn't reply. "Let me see." She shook her head. "Just step back. I ain't gonna touch you," he said. "Just want to see." She paused, then turned slowly, lifting the shawl, tugging the neckline down one side. Her ribs were bruised. Deep purple stretched along her skin, edged with green and yellow, the kind of injury that had been healing for days. Nayati's jaw tightened. That wasn't new. Likely cracked. Maybe worse. "How long?" he asked. Still she said nothing. He looked into her eyes, then stepped back. "I've got something for pain. Won't fix it, but might ease the sting." She looked at him, then gave one slow nod. They returned to the cabin. Nayati opened a drawer and took out a small jar. His late wife, Nita Willow, had made it pine resin herbs root oil, good for burns and bruises. He set it on the table and turned his back. She handled the rest herself. The smell filled the room, sharp, earthy, almost familiar. When she finished, she sat near the fire, arms folded, eyes locked on the flame. And then she spoke. "Army took my brothers." Nayati turned his head. She wasn't looking at him, just the wall. I was hiding. They found me a day after. Her fingers traced the faint marks on her wrist where shackles had once bitten deep. He didn't pry. "I'm not going back," she said. "You won't." She looked at him, then long and sure. "You didn't ask what I did. I don't care." One more nod. Then silence. They spent the rest of the day splitting wood. She watched him work, then picked up the axe herself. He didn't stop her. Her first swings were wild, uneven, but she adjusted quick. She learned fast. He handed her gloves without saying a word. By afternoon, sweat had darkened her dress, deepening the torn neckline, revealing the swell of her breasts beneath the fabric. Nayati saw. Looked once, looked away. But the image stayed. Not out of lust. Just a simple truth: she was beautiful. He made stew again that night. This time she helped, cutting vegetables, stirring the pot. Still silent, but close. They ate without talking, but it wasn't tense, just quiet. Afterward, she cleaned the bowls, dried them, put them back exactly where she found them. As night came, Nayati stoked the fire again. "You want another blanket?" he asked. She nodded. He brought one, handed it over. She laid down in the same place, boots off stone in hand. This time she left the shawl draped over the chair. Nayati sat across from her again, same as before. The stove radiated steady heat. He thought about her words, about her silence, about how she chose to say what she said when she did. She hadn't asked him a single thing? Not yet. Maybe she never would. That night, for the first time, she lay on her back, still clutching that stone. Her eyes closed slow. Her breathing softened. Nayati Firewolf watched the fire settle to embers, and he felt something unspoken begin to take root. Trust quiet and growing. He didn't move, not even when the house fell into darkness. The storm rolled in 2 days later without a whisper of warning. Just before dawn, it crawled across the hills like a slow beast, first in shades of gray, then with full fury. Wind hammered the porch and howled through every crack in the windows. Nayati Firewolf woke to the sound of the barn door banging, wild roof groaning like it might give. He got up and braced the door, testing the latch. It held. For now. Behind him, she stirred. He looked back. She was already upright, blanket bunched around her hips, her long hair sticking to the sweat along her spine. She hadn't made a sound through the night, but her brow was wet. A nightmare. He knew. It was in her shoulders, tight. In her slow blinking, like coming back to this world was a hard thing. He didn't press her. Just moved to the stove, raked the coals, and fed the fire until it caught. Outside, the wind roared louder. Snow slapped the glass in quick, mean streaks, the kind that stuck. "We're not going anywhere today," he muttered. "Chickens'll make it. You'll freeze in that dress." Her voice was soft. Then she looked at him. "You got more clothes?" He scratched his neck, uneasy. "My wife's things, still in the back closet." She gave a single nod, and he led her down the hall to the room on the left. The hinges moaned as the door swung open. The air inside was stale, forgotten. A lone window looked out eastward. Dust clung to the dresser's edge as he opened the top drawer. Folded skirts, cotton blouses, shawls, all still clean, untouched since Nita Willow passed. He didn't reach in. He stepped aside. She didn't flinch. Slipped past him, fingers brushing the dresser lightly. She picked a dark wool skirt, a simple blouse. Nothing fancy, just practical. She gave him a brief look. He turned away and stepped out. 10 minutes later, she returned. She wore the blouse and skirt. The fabric hung loose but not awkwardly. The neckline rose high, hiding what her torn dress once showed. Still, her shape lingered beneath the cotton. The soft curve of her waist, the rise of her chest, the way the skirt swayed with her step. He glanced once, then turned back to the fire. "Better?" he asked. She nodded. "Warm." That was enough. They stayed in all morning. She sat by the stove patching a tear in the shawl. He shaved in the basin, watching her through the window's reflection. Around midday, the wind softened. Just barely. Nayati stood stretched, walked to the front window. Snow had covered the porch deep, half a foot already. The barn roof bowed under the weight. The woodshed looked buried to its knees. Not a track in sight. No life out there. Just white and quiet. He turned and caught her watching him. "You ever lived through snow?" he asked. She shook her head. "We followed seasons, mountains sometimes, but not this. You'll hate it by February." She didn't smile. Didn't look away either. He went back to the stove, stirred last night's stew. "Still good." He broke bread and handed her half. They ate together, legs stretched toward the flames. Then, out of nowhere, she spoke. "You married long." He took his time, answering. 7 years. She died. Fever. 3 winters ago. She nodded. No pity. No questions. You no husband. No children. Something clicked in him just then. He'd assumed she once belonged to someone, that she'd been taken, or worse, sold. But maybe not. "Your name," he said. "You never told me." "Aiyana," she replied. He whispered it, Aiyana, letting the sound rest on his tongue. She studied his mouth, then looked away. "You want to ask me something?" she said. "You've been looking like you do." He hesitated. "Why didn't you run?" She didn't speak at first. Then nowhere to go. He nodded. It made sense. Not that she couldn't. But where would she go? The snow kept falling. The light faded early. The wind died, but the weight of the storm lingered. Inside the cabin felt tight. Warmer, but close. Aiyana scooted nearer to the fire. Nayati sat nearby, rubbing the old ache in his leg. "Bad fall," he offered. "Horse. 3 winters ago. I limp when it's cold." She didn't pity him. Just nodded. He leaned forward to shift the logs. She moved too. Her hand brushed his as she steadied a shifting piece of wood. He froze. So did she. Their hands hovered close. Then she placed her palm fully over his. It wasn't a grab, just a touch. Intentional, steady, warm. Nayati didn't pull back. He looked up. Really looked. Her face was calm, her eyes clearer than he'd seen. He turned his hand just enough to hook his fingers into hers. The moment held. Still. Still. Then she drew her hand back and sat straight again. No words. Later, when she lay down, she didn't face the wall. She stayed on her back, quilt tucked to her chest, eyes closed, breath steady. Nayati stayed by the fire. His hand still burned with her touch. That night no dreams took her, no cries, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the only living soul in that house. When the snow melted, the land looked softer. The fields lost their hard lines, fence posts buried, then rising again, now brittle with thaw. The days grew longer. Sunlight snuck in early through the shutters. Nayati had started sleeping with the window cracked. He claimed it was for air. Truth was, he liked hearing her breathe from the next room. She didn't sleep on the floor anymore. The little room at the back, the one Nita Willow once locked away for sewing, was empty now. It took 2 silent days to clear it out. Nayati didn't explain. He just moved crates to the shed. Aiyana didn't ask. She swept the dust without a word. That's how it was now. Quiet harmony. Unspoken rhythm. She wore the same few clothes washed by hand behind the house. He offered her coins once, for town, for more. She said, "Not yet." He understood. Too many eyes. Too many whispers. Instead, she kept wearing the faded cotton dress she liked best. She'd found one with little buttons down the front, snug at the waist. Nayati noticed she'd stitched up the torn neckline. It no longer revealed much. But when she bent to rinse something at the basin, or moved across the yard in the evening sun, her figure still caught the light just so. He tried not to stare. Sometimes he failed. Other times he caught her stealing a glance his way. Her look was hard to read, so he threw himself into mending the west fence that morning. She came along. He handed her gloves again. Without complaint, she hammered nails through thick rail posts, focused and calm. When a plank slipped and scraped her arm, she just drew in a sharp breath, wiped the blood on her skirt, and kept working. By midday, they were sitting under the cottonwood tree by the creek. "You always worked this land alone?" she asked. Nayati leaned back, arms behind his head. "Since Nita passed, yeah. Had a ranch hand before that. Fellow from down south." "What happened to him?" "Left when folks started whispering about war again. Didn't want to stick around for the trouble." "And you?" "I'm done with men holding rifles," she said. "Whatever comes, it'll stay out there." She nodded toward the hills. She was quiet for a beat. "I used to walk those ridges," she said finally. "Before it all changed. You could see 3 valleys from up top. My brothers knew every name down there. You missed them." Her jaw went tight. She dug her fingers into the dirt every single day. He passed her the tin canteen. She took a sip without looking at him. That night he cooked again. Salt pork and beans with cornmeal. She helped chopping onions with quiet precision. For the first time, they ate out on the porch, wrapped in old blankets against the chill. The stars hung clear and sharp. She leaned back, gaze lost in the night sky. "You afraid of dying?" she asked out of nowhere. He took his time. "Wasn't," he said finally. "Then I lost Nita. After that, yeah, I was. Now," he shrugged, "I'm not chasing it, but I'm not hiding either." Aiyana turned to look at him. The lantern's glow caught her cheekbone and neck. "I'm still hiding," she said. This time he looked at her. Really looked. "You don't have to," he said. She gave a small nod, but her hands stayed clenched tight in her lap. Next morning she touched his hand again. They were clearing brush behind the barn. She tripped over a root. He caught her arm. When she found her footing, she didn't pull away. Instead, she placed her hand gently over his. Light. Intentional. He didn't move. She looked at their hands, then at him. Her gaze didn't flinch. His throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but no words came. She let go first. That night she carved something into the edge of the porch with a knife. He didn't notice it until dawn, 2 tiny symbols, not letters, not names. One looked like a mountain, the other a flame rising. He didn't ask. The days stacked like fence rails. They worked the field for planting. She learned to seed rows clean. He taught her how to tie trellises with wire and broken branches. She mimicked every move he made, quick and precise. He hadn't touched Nita's old things in years. Now Aiyana wore one of her belts slung across her hip, the leather worn and darkened. It fit her differently, but he didn't mind. He caught himself watching her once, standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Her skirt hugged the back of her legs in the breeze. Her blouse lifted just enough when she reached up to hang laundry. His eyes followed the curve of her back. She turned, saw him. But neither of them looked away. Later, when she passed him on the steps, her arm brushed his. On purpose. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not from worry, but from something else. A weight in his chest. A truth she hadn't left. She had touched his hand. She was still here. And he wanted her to stay. Just before dawn, hooves broke the silence. Not the usual clatter of a neighbor passing through. These were heavier. Slower. Intentional. More than one rider. He tossed aside the quilt, stepped to the window, and peered out. 3 men on horseback coming up the road. Not in a rush, but they weren't lost either. They were coming straight for the house. He pulled on his shirt and coat, grabbed the old rifle from the doorframe. It hadn't been fired in over a year. He prayed it'd stay that way. Aiyana was already standing near the kitchen, watching him face unreadable. "Who are they?" she asked. "Don't know yet," he said. But he had a feeling. Nayati stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but not aimed. The riders stopped just short of the fence, dust curling around their boots. The man in the center sat tall, well-fed with polished boots and a pressed coat that didn't belong on a dirt road. Flanked by 2 others, one thin and twitchy, the other stocky and silent, both strapped with holstered guns. The tall man spoke first. "Morning." Nayati gave a nod. "Morning. We're looking for someone." "Apache woman. 'Bout yay high, long dark hair. Came through Ash Ridge some time back. Sheriff said she was claimed. She was. By you, yeah. She's here." The man exhaled, annoyed. "Name's Tokala Blackstorm. I speak for a landholder down near Bisbee. Had a claim on a batch of Apache taken last August. This one ran off. She's still listed. He's owed compensation." "I paid silver for her," Nayati said. "She's no prisoner now?" "Maybe so. But she's still on the federal roll, which means technically she's property. She's either to be returned or reassigned. Your silver don't change the ledger. She's not going anywhere." Blackstorm shifted in his saddle. Tone colder now. "Sir, maybe you don't understand. I've got orders to bring her back. Doesn't need to get ugly." Behind Nayati, the door creaked open. Aiyana stepped out. Wrapped in an old shawl, bare feet on the boards, shoulders firm. She stood beside Nayati, her gaze locked on Blackstorm. "I'm not going with you," she said. Blackstorm cocked his head. "Ma'am, this ain't personal." "Yes, it is." Nayati didn't look at her. "Look at. He just said you turn around, you ride out, you don't come back." The silence stretched. One of the men flexed his hand near his holster. "You draw iron on this land," Nayati said flatly. "Keep your sights on the jumpy one. He won't leave here breathing easy if he twitches wrong." Silence followed. Tokala shifted his stare first to Nayati, then to Aiyana, and finally to the barrel of that old rifle. At last he gave a tight nod and tugged his reins. Fine. Have it your way. They rode off without another word. Nayati watched them till they vanished beyond the ridge. Then he stepped down off the porch, pacing the edge of the yard, eyes raking the tree line, making damn sure they weren't doubling back. When he returned, Aiyana was still frozen where she stood. "You knew they'd show up," he said. "I figured someone would," she murmured, sinking down onto the steps. Her fingers pulled the shawl close, but they trembled now. Just a little. "I thought I was done running," she said quietly. "You are," Nayati told her. She looked at him, then uncertain. "They'll come back. I'll be ready." Her eyes lingered on his face. Why he didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "I ain't real good with words, but this ain't pity. You ain't here 'cause I felt sorry for you. I brought you home," he went on, "but you stayed. And that matters to me." Her lashes dropped low. Her throat worked like she was swallowing pain. "I never asked you to fight for me," she whispered. "You didn't have to." They sat in stillness after that. The wind whispered through the high branches overhead. Later she walked into the house and pulled one of Nita's old quilts from the cedar chest. She laid it over the chair where Nayati always sat at night. She didn't speak. He didn't either. That same evening he carved a new mark into the porch post, just beneath the ones Aiyana had left behind. Not letters, not a name, just a sign. She saw it the next morning. She didn't ask what it meant. She ran her fingers across it gently, then touched his hand not quickly, not in passing. This time she held on. By mid-April the nights turned soft again. The frost had melted off, but Nayati still kept the stove burning till long after sundown, not for warmth, but for the comfort of it. The soil outside finally yielded beneath the shovel. The air smelled of wet dirt and the slow stir of spring. The hens had started laying again. Days passed by in quiet repetition, fence mending, seed planting, sharpening worn tools. Nothing flashy, just rhythm. But for the first time in years, Nayati didn't mind the cycle. Aiyana changed, too, not loudly, but in the quiet ways. She spoke more, but only when it mattered. She didn't flinch at shadows anymore. Her shoulders rested easy. She didn't cling to the stone much these days. One evening he found her barefoot on the porch, arms wrapped around her frame eyes on the quiet trees. No wind. No danger. Just silence. He stepped up beside her. "You okay?" She didn't reply at first. Then softly, "I had a dream." He waited. "I was back in the canyon. Not the real one. The one from before the soldiers came. There was firelight voices, mesquite in the air. Laughter. Then it just stopped. Like someone held their breath. Everyone was gone. No sound, no smell. Just me holding my stone." She paused. "I woke up. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling, waiting to feel something." She swallowed hard. "I think I've run out of tears." "That's not good, is it?" Nayati answered carefully. "Maybe it just means you've lived through more than most folks could imagine." She studied his face. "Do you think I'm broken?" "No. How do you know?" "Because I've seen broken," he said gently. "It goes quiet inside. You stop moving. Stop wanting anything. But you're still here. Still fighting." She let out a shaky breath. "I used to hate silence. Now I can't sleep without it." "Same here," he said. She leaned against the post, not touching, but near. He didn't move away. He thought of the nights he'd stirred from sleep, listening for her breath down the hall, of her silhouette in the garden's early light, of how his hand still remembered hers even in sleep. He didn't say it, but it lived in his chest. That night the storm came out of nowhere. Not thunder, just wind, fierce and mean. It howled through every crack in the old cabin. Aiyana woke with a gasp. Nayati heard it from the front room. He rose, walked to her door, paused. "Can I come in?" he asked softly through the wood. Silence. Then, yes. She sat on the edge of her bed, knees drawn up, hands shaking. Her hair was damp, her eyes wild with old ghosts. He didn't reach for her. He just sat on the floor by her bed, arms on his knees, head bowed. "I saw them," she whispered. "The soldiers. I was hiding in the rocks. My brother was crawling to me. He never made it." Nayati said nothing. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. After a long time, she slid off the bed, sat beside him, not touching, but near. Then her hand found his. Slowly, her fingers slipped between his. Cool at first, then warm. "I don't want to forget them," she said. "But I can't live back there either." "You don't have to forget to move on." She nodded once. They stayed like that a long time, no talking, just the wind moaning through the eaves. When she finally leaned her head on his shoulder, he didn't stir. He just breathed with her, matched her rhythm, and waited. She settled. The storm had rolled on by morning, leaving the land quiet and damp. And when the sun came creeping over the ridge, Aiyana Skyfeather didn't shy away from its light anymore. That very day, as she passed Nayati Firewolf in the garden, her hand brushed his again. This time she didn't pull away. The first wildflowers bloomed near the end of May, small defiant bursts of yellow that pushed up through the dry earth like they were daring winter to come back. Nayati spotted them while mending a busted fence post. Aiyana was close by, down on her knees, planting squash in tight, careful rows. Dirt clung to her hands all the way to the wrists. Sweat streaked her brow, but she didn't seem to care. She worked like it mattered, like something inside her had begun to believe in roots. The house had changed too, not in size, but in feeling. It felt lived in now. Warmer. 2 mugs rested by the stove. 2 pairs of boots waited by the door. Nayati no longer laid tools across the empty side of the table. And Aiyana no longer checked the lock before bed. There were quiet signs everywhere. A woven cloth nailed above the window, for no reason but beauty. Bundles of herbs hung drying near the sink. Things she did without asking, without needing permission. One morning, Nayati found her standing on the porch. Arms folded, eyes on the post where he'd carved his old mark. Just beneath it were her symbols, sharp fresh. Her fingers traced them like they held some secret memory. Then she turned. "Did you love her?" she asked plainly. He didn't answer right away, just stepped beside her and said, "Yes." She gave a single nod. "Do you still?" He looked out toward the grass, the wind barely stirring. "I don't know. I think love doesn't leave, it just gets quieter, like an echo." She ran her eyes over the carving again. "I'm not here to take her place. You haven't." A long silence stretched between them. "I used to think letting someone in again meant letting everything else go," she said softly. "The grief, the pain, like I'd be betraying them. But now I see, staying alive is how I honor them." Nayati looked at her, watched how the morning light touched her cheek, how her breath came easy. "Aiyana," he said, "you're not what I expected, but you're what I want." She turned to him. Steady. No smile, just truth. He stepped closer. Her fingers flinched, then settled lightly on his waist. He moved slow, intentional. He touched her cheek, warm from the sun. He paused. She didn't. The kiss wasn't rushed or desperate. It landed with a quiet depth, like something earned after years of silence. Their lips met and held unhurried real, and when they parted, neither looked away. That night they sat by the fire, no words. Aiyana curled beside him, her legs tucked beneath her. Nayati's arm rested around her not for comfort, but because he chose to. Later she walked to the window, and stared into the night. "I never thought I'd stay anywhere this long," she murmured. "You thinking of leaving?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm thinking what it means not to." The moon sat high. The world was still. She came back, leaned fully into his chest. He held her tight. "We're not rescuing each other," she whispered into the dark. "No," he agreed. "We're choosing to stay." And she kissed him again, slower, deeper, not because she needed to, but because she could. By sunrise, gold light crept across the fields. Nayati was already out by the shed, arms folded, watching 2 doves peck along the garden fence. He didn't call for Aiyana. He didn't need to. She'd be up soon. These days she rose before the light reached the floorboards. When the door opened, it made no sound. She stepped out barefoot, same cotton skirt hair tied with cloth. She said nothing, just stood beside him, looking out over the soil they had turned together. The house behind them quiet, warm, and lived in. Windows open. The air smelled of earth and firewood, fresh markings etched into the porch post, small, careful carvings Aiyana had added over the week. Each one held meaning days, worked seeds, planted nights without fear. "Something's changed," she said. Nayati nodded. "Feels different." She laid a hand on her belly. He turned toward her. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. He didn't speak for a long time, just reached out and placed his hand over hers, felt the warmth, the calm in her breathing. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again," he said. "Didn't ask for it. You didn't either." They stood in silence. Later that week, Nayati rode into town alone for supplies. Folks watched, some longer than others, but no one said a word about the woman. They all knew now she wasn't passing through. She wasn't a burden. She belonged. He bought sugar, coffee, cloth, a small carved-handled knife. A gift. Useful. Meaningful. When he returned, Aiyana was on the porch, carving wood, another quiet habit. She smiled when she saw him. Not wide, but real. He handed her the knife. She traced its edge. "It's good," she said. "Thought maybe you'd want to carve something new." She stood, walked to the post, and for the first time carved letters her name. Beneath it, a space left open. Nayati noticed it said nothing, just reached into his pocket and pulled out the old wedding band. He hadn't touched it in over a year. He stared at it, then set it next to the knife. "I kept it," he said. Aiyana looked at it, then at him. "You still carrying it?" "Not anymore." She held his gaze, then carved his name too. So he did. Later she placed the old ring in the drawer next to a new one she'd made from a strip of leather and a bead from her old dress. 2 rings. No vows. No crowd. Just a shared drawer. That summer, Nayati built a cradle. He didn't say why, didn't explain. She stood beside it, placed her hand gently on its edge, and understood everything. without a single word. Her fingers brushed over a rough knot in the wooden beam, silent. Nayati Firewolf stood behind her, his hand resting gently at her waist. That night, Aiyana Skyfeather moved her boots from the doorway to the window. And when she went to bed, she left the river stone on the table. Beyond the window, the field stretched quiet and green. The wind moved slow. Both had carried too much sorrow, but they had stayed. And in that quiet staying, they had found everything. The snow didn't vanish overnight. It retreated little by little, first from the porch's edge, then the southern wall, and finally from the curve of the garden, where Nayati had laid compost long ago. The ground was soft, stubborn. Aiyana stepped into it barefoot, her toes sinking into the thawed earth, her footprints staying put. Arms crossed, she stared into the field. No words, only breath visible in the morning chill. Nayati approached with a seed sack slung over his shoulder shovel in the other hand. He said nothing. No need. He paused to watch her against the frost-lit dawn. Her hair wrapped in cloth hung dark and low. The shirt hugged her shoulders in a way that made him remember she'd sewn the buttons tighter 2 weeks back. He had watched her do it quiet across the table, coffee between them. No talk, just a nod. Then they began. He broke the soil with smooth, practiced thrusts, shoulders firm, movements slow and even. She followed him, picking through roots, laying seeds gently in every new trench. No words, no need. They moved in step. Chickens stirred nearby. The sky brightened. The air smelled like wet bark and ash. Aiyana didn't hum, but her lips moved like she was whispering an old tune. Nayati noticed, said nothing. He liked the way her hands worked, focused, unhurried. They had found a rhythm. Whether it was her matching him or him learning her steps, he didn't know. By midday, sweat traced his collar. A streak of dirt marked her cheek. She wiped it, leaned against a fence post, chest rising with every breath. Her blouse clung slightly at the top, unbuttoned, just enough to hint at the curve underneath. Not a tease, just real. He looked. She saw him looking. Didn't look away until he did. 3 more rows, he said. She gave a short nod. They finished before sundown. That was how they measured time. Now, not by the hour, but by how much light was left. Late afternoon, a rider passed on the road, not fast, just trotting. A young man, 20, maybe. Nayati knew his face from the market, not his name. He slowed near the fence, stared at Aiyana. Too long. She kept working. Nayati didn't wave, didn't say a word. Just stood tall. The rider tipped his hat not kindly and rode on. Aiyana spat in the dirt, wiped her hands on her skirt. They always look. Nayati waited. Let him. Does it bother you? Yeah, she said, but not enough to stop standing beside you. She went back to work. When the rows were done and the tools cleaned, they sat on the porch with 2 mugs of warm cider. The sun dipped low. Nayati winced, rubbing his back. You're slower than last spring, she teased. I'm older than last spring. I could have done those rows myself. I know. She pulled her knees up under a blanket. The fabric tugged across her chest again. He saw it. She saw him see it. Still no words. You regret it, she asked. Bringing me here. Keeping me. No, he said, without pause. Even when they stare. I don't live for them. She looked down, circling the rim of her mug. I still wait for someone to come for me, she said. No one's taking you. You don't know that. I know what I'll do if they try. He didn't raise his voice, didn't touch her, but the weight of his words hung between them. She rested her head against the porch post, eyes half closed. "Then I'll stay." He didn't move. But his hand, slow and sure, crossed over and landed on her thigh just above the knee. Her hand found his, not gripping, just resting. They sat that way as the light faded and the ground cooled beneath their feet. Nothing more needed saying. They were uncovered now. Not just the land, but their hearts, too. The wagon creaked under the load sacks of oats, a crate of nails, a barrel patched up for flour. Nayati held the reins loose in one hand, the other hovering near the rifle at his side. Not expecting trouble. But knowing towns didn't forget easy. Last time he brought Aiyana to Ash Ridge, folks had only stared. That was before she'd taken his hand out front. Before they'd started saying things like "we." She sat beside him now, in a brown dress boots, polished hair, tied back with woven cloth she'd made. Face clean, shoulders straight. No shawl, no hat to duck under. When town crested the ridge, she didn't shrink. Nayati didn't ask if she was ready. She didn't need to be. They passed the old mill, silent wheel turning over Low Creek. Then the schoolhouse, then the livery. Two boys stopped their work to stare. Aiyana looked straight ahead. In the square, Nayati pulled the wagon to a halt. Usual crowd moved slow between stalls. Salt pork, apples, tools, lamp oil, scrap cloth. Whispers low, but the stares loud. Aiyana stepped down first. Quiet. Calm. Boots hit dirt. She brushed her skirt. Didn't cling. Didn't hide. Walked right beside Nayati, who hoisted the empty grain sack and headed toward the store. An older woman at the textile stall, round face too many rings, watched Aiyana with narrowed eyes, then leaned in close to another woman and whispered. Aiyana heard. Nayati heard. Neither said a word. Inside the store, Kiona Redhawk stood behind the counter. His hands were already tightening, gaze shifting back and forth. He cleared his throat. "Mornin', Nayati." Mornin' Kiona Redhawk nodded toward Aiyana Skyfeather. "Let me guess your usual. 2 spools of dark thread and a new saw blade." He turned away, grabbed the blade off the shelf, then disappeared toward the back to fetch the thread. As he walked, his voice carried not loud, but just clear enough. "Folks got a lot of questions these days, Nayati. About what's right and what ain't." Nayati didn't flinch. Neither did Aiyana, her fingers resting light on the edge of the counter. She didn't so much as blink. When Kiona came back, Nayati set a coin flat on the wood. "You sellin' goods today or preachin'?" he asked, calm and cool. Kiona Redhawk stiffened lips, thinning, but said nothing. He took the money. They stepped back out into the glare of sun, walked past booths and stalls, eyes following them every step. The stares didn't stop. A child pointed. His mother jerked him back hard by the arm. By the blacksmith's stall, a few men paused, mid-work eyes dragging over Aiyana's hips. One of them let out a low, greasy whistle. Nayati stopped cold. The man, lean, stubbled collar, dusted with the road, grinned up at him. "Didn't know Apaches came housebroken." Nayati didn't speak, didn't reach for his rifle. Just stepped forward close enough for the man's smile to crack. "She ain't yours to look at," Nayati said. "Knowed an iron hand." The blacksmith looked up from the anvil. The whistler shifted his stance, spit near his boot, and slinked away. Nayati turned back. Aiyana hadn't moved. "Sorry," he murmured. "You didn't do it," she replied. They walked on. Before they left town, Aiyana stopped at a tattered bookstall and thumbed through a dog-eared copy of Robinson Crusoe. Her fingertips were gentle on the pages, her eyes tracking the faded lines. Nayati paid for it without a word. On the ride home, the wind kicked up. She held the book on her lap. "Still think this is worth it?" she asked, voice barely above the breeze. Nayati kept his eyes on the trail. "I never thought it wasn't." "I almost walked away," she said, back at that stall, when they stared. "I know. But I didn't." "I know," he said again. Then turned to look at her. "You didn't say anything. That day in Ash Ridge when you paid for me. I wasn't ready. And now I am," he said. She let those words settle, then reached across and found his hand, fingers weaving into his like it was second nature. He gripped tight and didn't let go until they reached home. The smoke rose just after sunset, thin, pale, purposeful. Not the wild scatter of a brush fire. Not lightning. This was deliberate. It climbed from the tree line beyond the far field, about a mile out, where the land dipped near the old hunting trail. Nayati saw it first while stacking dry wood by the barn. He didn't react right away, just stared. Aiyana stepped out onto the porch bowl in hand and followed his gaze. She didn't ask, didn't need to. Her body stilled. "They're Apache," she said at last. "They wouldn't send smoke unless they meant to be seen." Nayati gave a single nod. "How many?" "Hard to say. They move light now. You want me to go out there?" "No," she said, her voice steady. "They want me to come. That's why they lit it." He looked at her then. She stood tall, bowl steady in her grasp, but something behind her eyes shifted. Not fear. Not exactly. Something older, heavier. "They're not scouts," she added. "They're kin." "You sure?" She nodded. "Yes." The breeze changed, carrying the scent of burnt cedar. Her fingers tightened around the bowl. "I'll light a fire down by the edge of the property. Let 'em know they can come in peace." Nayati didn't argue. He helped her gather kindling. Just before dusk, they built a small fire by the creek bed where the old trail widened. Aiyana stood beside it alone as shadows stretched across the land. Nayati waited at the fence. He didn't follow. He knew better. They arrived at full dark, 3 of them. The lead was an older man, face worn like river stone, wrapped in a buffalo hide, rubbed smooth by years. Beside him, a woman Aiyana's age, sharp-eyed with wind-burned cheeks, and a boy no more than 10, his bare feet silent on the pine needles. Aiyana greeted them in a tongue Nayati didn't know. The words were clipped, soft, melodic. Her voice changed deeper, smoother, like wind on water. The old man nodded, spoke once, and looked straight toward Nayati. Aiyana raised a hand. "He's not your enemy." The woman stared longer. Her eyes landed on Aiyana's dress. Her boots, the silver chain at her throat, the one Nayati had given her. There was no insult. But the weight of her gaze made it clear judgment had been passed. Aiyana said more, then stepped back, inviting them to the fire. They spoke for a long time. Low tones, quiet hands, glances that carried more than words. The boy leaned against Aiyana. She stroked his hair, smiling faintly. Nayati, watching from the field, saw the smile, and how quickly it disappeared. When they rose to go, the woman pulled a bundle from her satchel, a cloth of red and ochre knotted at the corners. She handed it to Aiyana. Inside beads, hair ties, dried herbs, pieces of a life long buried. Aiyana didn't cry, but she held them like they were fragments of a name she'd forgotten how to say. The woman said something longer this time, laid a hand on her shoulder. Then they were gone. No fire left behind. Aiyana walked back slowly. The bowl still sat where she'd left it cold now. Nayati didn't move until she reached the porch steps. "You all right?" he asked. "They're from my mother's cousin's camp," she said. "They've been walking north from the southern camps. They found my brother's grave, built a marker." He nodded. "They asked me to go with them, start a new camp, a new circle." Nayati stayed quiet. She looked at him. "They don't understand," she said. "Why I stay with a white man who hardly speaks. Why I sleep behind timber walls instead of under the stars, while others stared at her like she was some mystery to be solved." Nayati Firewolf held her gaze and said nothing. "I told them Aiyana Skyfeather said, voice unwavering, because he never took anything from me. That's all." They stepped inside together. No more words were spoken that night, but when she fell asleep, her fingers no longer clung to the stone. She held the red cloth instead. The next morning felt different, not colder, not warmer, just still. Even the chickens scratched the earth with unusual silence. Nayati was up before the sun, but her bed was already empty. The blanket folded. The door left ajar, her boots gone. He stood on the porch, coffee in hand, scanning the hazy tree line. Nothing. Then a flicker, a brown skirt vanishing into the woods by the far ridge. She hadn't taken her rifle, just a satchel. He didn't call after her, didn't go. Instead, he waited, kept his hands busy. He fixed the grain shed latch, replaced a post near the garden, chopped firewood while the sun was still low. But his thoughts stayed circling around her expression the night before, and the silence that followed. By noon, he found himself on the porch again, arms crossed. Still no sign of her. He didn't eat. Shadows stretched long across the yard. The silence inside grew heavy. He sat in her chair for the first time. Just sat. One hand resting on her folded blanket. It still held her warmth from the morning. By dusk, the sky glowed like tarnished copper. He lit the lantern early, left it burning low. And he thought, what if she didn't come back? He had no claim over her. No contract, no ring, no promise. What they had wasn't signed or spoken. It lived in quiet chores, in shared breath, in evenings of unsaid comfort. Was that enough? He knew he wasn't the same man who'd brought her through that gate. And she wasn't the same woman chained behind it. The stars appeared quietly. Then footsteps on the path. He stood, hand brushing the doorframe. She came from the trees like she belonged to them. Tired calm, steady steps, her hair unbound, skirt damp with dew, the satchel sagging on her shoulder. She saw him. Didn't pause. Climbed the porch. Stopped only when she was near enough to reach out. "I sat with them," she said. "Ate their food. Watched their fire." Nayati stayed silent. They told stories. Asked what I was doing here. Why I'd stay in a place where people hate me for the shape of my face. No tremble in her voice. Just truth. I told them I didn't know the answer. Not yet. Still, he said nothing. "I needed to be with them for a night," she continued, "to remember where I came from, to listen." She looked up. But I didn't sleep. Her jaw set firm. I watched the stars all night, and when the sun rose, I walked. Didn't plan it. My feet just moved. Toward here. Nayati stepped aside. She passed him, walked inside. Satchel down, boots off. Then turned to face him. "I don't belong to them anymore," she said. "But I'll always be of them." "You understand that I do," he answered. She nodded. Walked to him, not rushed, but sure. Her hand pressed flat against his chest. Still, certain. He didn't speak, just placed his hand over hers. And that was it. She stayed. By early summer, the land had dried to the point it cracked beneath wagon wheels. Nayati noticed it hauling firewood from the shed deep crevices where water once soaked the soil. He didn't like it. Drought made men nervous. Nervous men made poor neighbors. Wakan Longstep had never been a good one. The first time Nayati saw him that year was at the east fence, where his own boundary ended and Wakan's cattle trail began. Nayati was fixing a busted post when he heard the hooves. Wakan came slow on a roan mare, reins slack, scanning the fence like it already belonged to him. Nayati stood tall, didn't wave, waited. Wakan pulled close, one boot trailing dust. "You've been planting real close," he said, like it was casual. "Real close to where our markers used to run." Nayati didn't move. "Your markers have always been 20 yards east." Wakan gave a half smile. "Lines shift, fences rot, memories fade." Nayati said nothing. "You got no deed on that strip," Wakan added, nodding at the field between them. "Just the word of a man who's been dead 2 years. I could use that land." Behind them, the wind kicked up dry dirt. Wakan leaned forward. "Truth is, folks are talking saying you're shacked up with that Apache girl like she's your wife. No ring, no preacher, no law." Nayati's grip on the post didn't waver. Wakan pushed. "You keep playing house with her and this town's gonna start feeling smaller, less friendly. She has a name," Nayati said at last. "If you're gonna speak, use it." Wakan laughed. "You think a name changes what she is?" That's when Nayati looked up, eyes steady, silent. Wakan's grin faded. Next morning, Nayati pounded new stakes into the soil. Tall ones, with fresh rope. He didn't speak of it, just worked marking every foot, every inch down that disputed row. Aiyana stood off to the side, silent. She didn't lift a hand to help, she didn't need to. When he finished, Nayati grabbed a blackened stick from the fire, walked to the nearest post, and carved one word deep into the wood. Firewolf. Later that night, Aiyana ran her fingers over the name. Her face gave away nothing, but she lingered there long after the coals had cooled. A week passed. Wakan Longstep rode by again, slower this time. He eyed the stakes, then the carved name. He didn't say a word, just spit in the dirt and kept riding. Inside the cabin, Aiyana hung a bundle of sage above the doorframe. Nayati didn't ask why. She just said softly, "Keeps bad spirits out." He let it hang. The sun came harder now. By midday, the heat pressed down like a branding iron. Flies clung to every beast on the farm. The soil split wide between the rows of corn. Nayati worked shirtless most afternoons, sweat darkening the waist of his trousers, boots dust-caked from pacing the land. Aiyana tied back her hair with a strip of old linen. Her skin had gone the color of copper and dust. She never spoke of the heat, never once complained. But her quiet lately, there was weight behind it. That evening they ate on the porch again. Simple supper beans, pan-fried bread, a single apple cut between them. No talking, just the clatter of spoons and the wind rolling lazy over the hills. The lantern between them sputtered and struggled to hold its flame. When they finished, Aiyana didn't rise. She sat still, hands in her lap, bowl empty, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Nayati broke the silence. "You're awful quiet." She didn't look at him. "I've been remembering. Bad memories." "Not quite," she said, leaning forward, elbows on knees. I was thinking about the day you bought me. Nayati's hand froze near the lantern. You don't have to talk about that. I do. Her voice was flat. Honest. I never thanked you. Not for taking me. Not for keeping quiet. Not for keeping me. You don't owe me anything, he said. I know, but I owe myself the truth. She stared down. I thought you'd use me, or trade me, or leave me the first time things got hard. Her voice caught. You didn't. You didn't ask anything of me. You didn't sell me. You didn't leave. Nayati looked down at his hands, scarred and sunburned rough from years of labor. I didn't know how to save you, he said quietly. I just knew I couldn't walk away. She turned to him. Maybe you didn't save me, she said. But you stayed. That counts. He didn't speak. Didn't breathe. I'd stay again, he whispered. Her eyes searched his. Even now, even now. The crickets stirred by the fence line. Their kiss wasn't hurried. It wasn't hesitant. Aiyana's hand came to his cheek first, guiding him. When their lips met, it was sure, solid. No fear, no shame. Just shared breath and the end of everything they hadn't said. She didn't pull away. Her forehead rested against his. I've never had a man who didn't want something, she whispered. You do now, he said. She closed her eyes. And in that breath, something shifted. No more wondering, no more distance. She was his, and he was hers. The storm rose out of the south, low dark and fast, like it had business here. Nayati saw it while setting the final fence post. The wind hit like a freight train, hot and sudden, stirring dust into a frenzy and sending the chickens into a scatter. He dropped the hammer and scanned the sky. Aiyana stepped out from the garden, a half-filled basket in her hands. Her hair clung to her face. Her eyes narrowed at the black clouds. That's no passing wind, she said. No, he replied. We need to tie down the barn. They moved quick. No words, just instinct. Nayati secured the upper hay doors, cinched them tight with rusted wire. Aiyana tied down the feed barrels, slammed the shutters on the coop, yanked drying cloth off the line. The wind howled now, sharp, high-pitched, like it had teeth. Dust blew in waves, stinging their eyes by the time they reached the porch again. The sky had turned a sickly shade of gray. Then lightning lit the tree line. Nayati froze. It struck again, closer. Thunder cracked hard, shaking the windows. And then came the sharp blast. Not thunder. He spun toward the barn, saw the smoke billowing. He bolted. The water barrels, he shouted, already running. Aiyana was right behind him, buckets in hand, skirts hitched high. Flames curled out of the loft like fingers. Nayati grabbed the ladder, climbed fast, kicked the hatch open. Smoke poured into his face. Throw it, he yelled. She tossed the first bucket. He caught it half slopping, dumped it on the corner. It hissed, but didn't die. He stomped it with a boot, swung a tarp over the second blaze. Aiyana ran for more water. The smoke clawed at his lungs, burned his throat, blurred his sight. But he didn't stop. By the time the last bucket landed, the flames had weakened. He beat at the smoldering rafters until only smoke curled around him. He stayed on the ladder, panting, dripping lungs burning. Below, Aiyana stood soaked through. Her chest heaved. Her braid was undone. Strands of hair stuck to her cheeks. He climbed down, slow, coughing. They stood a few feet apart, steam rising from their clothes, hands blackened with soot and ash. We saved it, she said barely above a whisper. Nayati nodded, breath ragged. Just barely. She looked at him. Really looked. The burns. The ash. The blood on his knuckle. You ran in without thinking. You brought water without being asked. They stared. Then Aiyana moved. Walked straight into him. Pressed her chest to his. Wrapped her arms around his shoulders. He pulled her in arms tight around her waist. Everything still burning they left behind in the smoke. Their bodies wet. Their breath hot. The world around them mud fire sweat. He pressed his face into her neck and held on. She held tight to the back of his shirt, breath trembling against the storm-soaked air. No words. Just two people who had stopped running. Together, Nayati Firewolf and Aiyana Skyfeather stood in the smoke-stained calm, drenched through their hearts, steadier than ever before. The next market day dawned with sun-baked skies and a dry breeze whispering through the valley. The wagon rolled slow along the dusty road, fine grit clinging to every spoke and boot. Nayati wore his cleanest shirt, buttoned up neat face freshly shaved. Even pulled on his polished boots, the ones he'd oiled the night before. Aiyana wore her darkest dress, the one with the high collar and blue stitching she'd added by hand. Her long braid hung loose down her back. No shawl. No hat. They rode into Ash Ridge, side by side, shoulders close, unflinching. The town square bustled carts, lined up barrels, stacked high horses tied to every rail. The air thick with sweat livestock coffee and dust. Chatter swirled clipped and sharp. But when they stepped off the wagon, that chatter shifted. Folks noticed them, they always did. But this time, something was different. Aiyana didn't cling to his arm. She didn't cast her gaze down. She walked beside him, tall, calm, and composed. Nayati held the shopping list in one hand, the other hovering protectively near the curve of her back when the crowd grew tight. They hit the dry goods stall, the blacksmith, then the grain shop. A few men gave Nayati curt nods, but none met Aiyana's eyes. Some women turned away. A child stared. Aiyana stared back. They were nearly done when Wakan Longstep leaned casually on a post near the supply shed. Shirt loose at the collar, suspenders hanging cigarette tucked behind his ear. He waited until they passed, then said loud enough for all to hear quite the show. Bringing livestock to market dressed like that. Nayati halted. So did Aiyana. He turned slowly. Wakan's gaze fixed squarely on Aiyana, his grin lopsided body relaxed. Or maybe she ain't livestock anymore, he drawled, tone slick. Maybe now she's just your plaything. Either way, folks are wondering what she really is to you. Nayati didn't raise a fist. Didn't shout. He took one step forward. That was all it took. She's my woman, he said. Clear. Unshaken. Final. Aiyana looked up at him, eyes wide with something between disbelief and burning pride. Wakan's smile faltered. He said nothing more. Nayati turned, walked back to Aiyana, took her hand, led her through the parting crowd. This time no one stared. They looked down. At the wagon, Nayati helped her up without a word. Aiyana sat straight, hands resting in her lap. Then she whispered, "You didn't have to say that." "I wanted to," he replied. She turned toward him. "You weren't afraid. I've known fear plenty of times, but not of them, not anymore." She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his like it belonged there. And it did. When they left Ash Ridge, the sun dipped behind them, setting fire to the edges of the sky. Summer pressed on dry, brilliant, but the land endured. The crops rose strong and green. The hens laid daily. Bees returned to the wildflowers down by the creek. Fence posts held firm where Nayati had driven them deep. The fire hadn't taken the barn. The storm hadn't touched the roof. And no strangers had come down that road in weeks. Peace, like everything in Nayati's life, had been carved slowly, one small step at a time. That morning he hauled a fresh-cut cedar plank from the barn, setting it across 2 sawhorses in the front yard. Aiyana stepped outside, brushing flour off her hands. Her face curious. "What's that?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, just began carving. She stayed near, arms crossed, 1 foot on the porch rail, watching the letters take shape. Mercer. She stepped closer, traced the grooves with her fingers. "You making a sign for the gate?" Nayati said. "Figured it's time folks knew who lives here." She looked at him, eyes steady. "Not just you." He nodded. "No, not just me." He sanded the wood smooth. She held the nails while he mounted it above the post. The sunlight caught it just right, fresh proud. She stared at it for a long while, her face unreadable. "I've never had my name on anything," she said softly. "You do now." That evening they walked the land together, past the coop, through the green rows down to the creek where the trees bowed low and the air smelled like grass and ash. They sat beneath a cottonwood, knees brushing. Her head rested against his shoulder. "I used to be so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that if I stayed something would break, or someone would take it away." "It wasn't fear that kept you here," Nayati said. "It was strength." She tilted her head to him. "You still carry the ring?" "No," he said. "I carry you now." The wind whispered through the trees. Dusk settled like a hush over the land. Back at the house, Nayati opened the door for her like always, but this time she paused at the threshold, reached out to touch the beam beside it. From her satchel, she drew out the red cloth, the one her kin had given her that night by the fire. She tied it to the porch rail with a knot only she would understand. Nayati watched her quietly. "It's not goodbye," she said. "It's to remember." He nodded. "Then I'll remember with you." Inside the cradle, weighted by the hearth, she walked over, placed a hand on its edge. The wood was smooth now, oiled and carved with symbols, mountains, water, fire, a horse, and one more, 2 lines crossed in a pattern she had taught him. She turned to him. No words now, just eyes clear, unguarded. They stood in the center of the room, no distance left, no more questions, no more fear, just home. The sign outside read Mercer, but inside it meant theirs.